On a chilly evening in downtown New York, former President Donald Trump was making his way through a crowded street when he noticed a frail, homeless veteran huddled against a building. What happened next was so unexpected that it left everyone around in stunned silence, setting the stage for a moment that would soon capture the nation's heart. As Trump approached, the crowd grew curious, their murmurs blending with the sounds of the bustling city. The veteran, wrapped in a tattered blanket, looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of weariness and surprise. Without hesitation, Trump crouched down to speak to the man, his usual commanding presence softened by an air of sincerity. "What's your name?" "Soldier," he asked. "Michael," the veteran replied, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Served in the Marines. But life's been tough since I got back." The former president listened intently as Michael spoke about his struggles, how he had once been a proud serviceman but had fallen on hard times after returning home. Job opportunities had been scarce. Medical bills had piled up. And before he knew it, he was left with nothing but the clothes on his back. The crowd around them grew, their curiosity turning into silent awe. Then, in a move no one expected, Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to Michael and said, "No American hero should be left behind. This is for you." Michael's hands trembled as he took the envelope, his eyes widening in disbelief. But Trump wasn't done yet. He turned to one of his aides and instructed, "Get this man a place to stay tonight, and a job by the end of the week." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some even wiped away tears. But as shocking as this act of generosity was, what happened next was even more unbelievable. Michael clutched the envelope, his breath hitching as he opened it. Inside was a stack of crisp $100 bills, enough to change his life overnight. His fingers trembled as he looked up at Trump, his eyes welling with tears. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Trump placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "Get back on your feet and help someone else when you can." The crowd, now completely silent, watched in awe. Some filmed the moment on their phones, while others whispered among themselves, unable to believe what they were witnessing. A woman in a business suit stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Trump," she said, clearing her throat, "I run a veteran support program. If Michael is willing, we can get him counseling, job training, and a place to stay permanently."
Michael turned to her, his expression shifting from disbelief to hope. I would love that," he stammered. "I just need a chance."
Trump nodded approvingly. "You've got it. America takes care of its own." But just as it seemed the story had reached its emotional peak, Michael took a deep breath and spoke again. "Mr. Trump, there's something I need to tell you." The energy in the air changed. The crowd leaned in, the moment hanging in suspense. What Michael revealed next left everyone speechless. Michael swallowed hard, his gaze locking onto Trump's. "Sir, we've met before," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Trump's brow furrowed. "We have?" Michael nodded. "It was years ago. I was just a young Marine, stationed overseas. You came to visit the troops." His eyes glistened as he recalled the memory. "You shook my hand and told me, 'America appreciates your service.' I never forgot that moment. It kept me going through some of the toughest times."
A hush fell over the crowd. Trump stared at Michael, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, in a rare display of emotion, he gave a slow nod. "And I meant it then. Just like I mean it now.
Michael wiped his eyes, trying to steady his breath. I lost my way when I came home. The war ended for us over there. But another war started here, one I didn't know how to fight. I lost my job. My family drifted away. And before I knew it, I was just another statistic. Another forgotten soldier. Trump's jaw tightened. You're not forgotten. Not anymore. The woman from the Veteran Support Program stepped forward again. Michael. We can get you the help you need. A roof over your head. A job. A second chance. Michael hesitated for just a second before finally nodding. I want that. I'm ready.
Trump turned to his aide. Make sure he gets whatever he needs. And keep me updated.
Applause broke out from the crowd. People who had simply been passing by were now wiping away tears, moved by the moment unfolding before them. But just as Trump was about to leave, Michael called out again. Sir. Wait. Trump turned back. Michael took a deep breath. There are more like me out here. So many more. Will you help them too? The question hung in the air. Challenging. Raw. And impossible to ignore. Trump studied Michael for a long moment before finally answering. Let's do something about it. And with that, something bigger began, something no one had seen coming. Trump's words sent a ripple through the crowd. Murmurs turned into excited chatter as people realized this wasn't just a fleeting act of generosity, this was the start of something bigger. Michael stood straighter. The weight of years of hardship seeming to lift from his shoulders. What do you mean? Sir, he asked. His voice carrying both hope and hesitation. Trump turned to his aide and spoke with firm resolve. Get my team on the phone. I want a full report on the state of homeless veterans in this country. We're not just helping Michael, we're going to do something that lasts. The people around them gasped. Some clapped. Others wiped away tears, realizing they were witnessing a moment that could change lives far beyond the one veteran standing before them. A reporter who had been covering Trump's visit stepped forward, microphone in hand. Mr. Trump, are you saying you're launching a new initiative for homeless veterans? Trump nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. Too many of our heroes are being left behind. That ends now. The news spread like wildfire. Within minutes, headlines flashed across social media. Trump vows to take on veteran homelessness after emotional street encounter. Calls poured into local veteran organizations. Donors reached out. The moment had ignited a movement. Michael, still processing the whirlwind of events, looked at Trump with newfound determination. Sir, if you're serious about this, I want to be part of it. I want to help others like me. Trump clapped him on the back. Then let's get to work. But just as they were about to leave, another voice called out from the crowd. Wait, there's someone else you need to meet. Heads turned as an older man, his face lined with hardship, stepped forward. His tattered coat barely shielded him from the cold. But there was something familiar in his eyes. Michael's breath caught in his throat. No, it can't be. Trump glanced between them. You know him? Michael's voice trembled. That's my brother. The crowd gasped. The story had taken another unbelievable turn, one that no one could have expected. Michael stood frozen. His eyes locked onto the man in front of him. His breath quickened as if his mind couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing. David? Michael's voice cracked. The older man hesitated, his expression a mix of shock and shame. He took a shaky step forward. Yeah, it's me. The crowd, already stunned by the evening's events, fell into a hushed silence. Trump glanced between the two men, sensing the weight of the moment. Michael's hands clenched into fists before relaxing again. "I thought you were dead," he whispered. David let out a heavy sigh. "I thought you were better off thinking that." His voice was rough, worn from years of hardship. I didn't want you to see me like this." Michael stepped forward, his emotions battling between anger, sadness, and relief. "I spent years wondering what happened to you. Mom and Dad never got answers. I thought I lost my only brother." David lowered his head. "I lost myself." He gestured to his ragged clothes. "After I got out of the army, things fell apart. I couldn't adjust. The nightmares, the guilt. I pushed everyone away." He exhaled sharply. "One day, I just walked away from everything. From you. From home. Figured no one would miss me." Michael swallowed hard, his emotions raw. "I missed you. You idiot." The two brothers stared at each other for a long moment before Michael suddenly pulled David into a tight embrace. The crowd erupted into quiet sobs and murmurs. Trump, watching the scene unfold, finally spoke. "This is exactly why we need to act. Too many heroes are slipping through the cracks. Too many families are torn apart." He turned to his aide. "We're not waiting. I want action now." David wiped his eyes, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." Trump patted his shoulder. "Then don't say anything yet. Just let us help you." The brothers, now reunited, stood side by side, both victims of a broken system, both given a second chance. But this was more than just their story now. This was a mission. And as Trump's promise turned into action, no one could have predicted just how far this movement would go. As the crowd continued to murmur in disbelief, the weight of the moment settled in. Michael and David, two brothers who had been torn apart by war and life's harsh realities, were now reunited, thanks to a chance encounter on a cold street corner. But this was only the beginning. Trump, now more resolute than ever, stepped forward. "This isn't just about these two men. It's about every veteran out there who is struggling, who feels forgotten. We owe them more than our thanks. We owe them our action." The crowd, inspired by his words, began to applaud. But Michael, still in shock, turned to Trump. "Sir, what happens next? How do we start?" Trump didn't hesitate. "We build a network. Shelters, job programs, mental health services. Whatever it takes to give these men and women a real shot at life. And we start with you too." David, who had been silently processing the whirlwind of events, looked at his brother, then back at Trump. "You're serious about this? You want to help us?" Trump nodded. "I'm not just helping you. I'm helping all of us. We can't let another veteran be forgotten." It was then that the woman from the Veteran Support Program stepped forward again, her eyes gleaming with hope. "We've already been working on a plan for long-term housing and employment for homeless veterans. We just need the resources, and now we have a partner." Michael's eyes shone with gratitude, but his voice trembled. "What if this doesn't work? What if it's all just a dream?" Trump gave him a firm look. "Then we fight for it until it's real. Because no one who has given their all for this country deserves to be left behind." With those words, something shifted in the air, a sense of unity, a sense of purpose. The brothers, who had once lost all hope, now stood with renewed strength. They were no longer just survivors of the system, they were catalysts for change. But just as it seemed things were taking shape, a voice from the back of the crowd called out. What about the families? What about the wives and children of the veterans? It was a question that no one had asked yet. But it was one that hit deep. Trump turned toward the voice, his brow furrowing. Of course. We're going to need to help families, too. We can't just focus on the veterans. Their loved ones are part of this fight as well. The moment was turning into something even greater. What began as a simple act of kindness had now sparked a broader conversation about supporting the families who often bear the weight of the sacrifice. As plans started to form and calls were made, Trump's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it quickly, then looked back at the crowd. This is bigger than just today. This is a movement. I want to be a part of something that lasts. I hope you all will join me. Michael and David, standing side by side, realized they weren't just witnessing history, they were helping to write it. And in that moment, the future of countless veterans was about to change forever. But there was still so much more to be done. The journey had just begun. As the crowd began to disperse, a quiet but powerful energy lingered in the air. Michael and David stood together, their eyes reflecting the uncertainty and hope of the moment. People gathered around them, offering words of encouragement and support. But it was clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Trump, now surrounded by aides and media, spoke with authority, his words strong and filled with purpose. We'll be setting up a national task force within the week. It's time to get to work. This is about real change, not just talk. His tone was unwavering, determined to see the initiative through. Michael, still trying to process everything that had happened, turned to his brother. David, do you think this is real? Do you think this can actually happen? David, with a skeptical but cautious optimism, looked out at the crowd that was beginning to thin. I don't know. But after everything that happened tonight, I don't think we can afford to not believe it. His voice cracked slightly. I've been waiting for something like this for years. Maybe this is the chance we needed. The brothers stood in silence, the enormity of their experience weighing heavily on them. But as they looked out over the crowd, it became clear they weren't alone. The people who had witnessed this act of generosity, this spark of something larger than themselves, were all ready to support. They had been inspired. A reporter, who had been silently recording the moment, stepped forward with a microphone. Mr. Trump, he began. How do you plan to ensure that this initiative doesn't fall through like so many others? What concrete steps will be taken? Trump met his gaze with calm determination. First, we build a coalition. We'll work with local organizations, state governments, and private donors. We'll ensure that no veteran is left behind, that their families are cared for, and that there is a pathway to success. I've been a businessman my whole life. I know how to get things done. The reporter nodded, impressed, before turning his attention to Michael and David. And what about you two? He asked. What role do you see yourselves playing in all of this? Michael, his voice steady, took a deep breath. We want to be part of the solution. I've seen how the system has failed us, and I don't want that to happen to anyone else. If we can help other veterans get the same chance we got tonight, we will. David added. I want to help rebuild lives. I want to see families reunited. Because it's not just about us, it's about every man and woman who served and is out here struggling." The reporter smiled and nodded. This could be the beginning of something transformative. As the interview wrapped up and the crowd dispersed, Trump approached the brothers once more. "I meant what I said earlier," he told them. "This isn't just about you or me. This is about making sure that veterans like you don't fall through the cracks again." Michael and David exchanged a look, two men, bound by blood and by shared struggles, now stepping into a future they had only dreamed of. And as they watched Trump walk away, his phone already ringing with calls from lawmakers and donors alike, they couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just one act of kindness. It was the beginning of a movement. But there was still one last thing to be done. One last question to answer. How far are we willing to go to make sure this works? Michael asked quietly. David glanced at him, a spark of hope in his eyes. As far as it takes.
And with that, they stepped forward into a future that had just begun. The journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, they were ready to face it together.
And little did they know, their actions would soon spark an even larger nationwide effort, a force that would bring veterans, families, and everyday citizens together to build something stronger than anyone ever imagined. But the story was far from finished. This was just the first chapter of a much larger tale. As the days passed, the news of Trump's impromptu meeting with Michael and David went viral. Headlines across the country buzzed with the story, each recounting the emotional encounter and the promise of change. The public rallied behind the brothers' story. And soon, organizations, both large and small, began reaching out with offers of support. But while the media attention was overwhelming, it was the quiet moments that made all the difference. Michael and David, now back at their temporary shelter, had their first real conversations about what their lives could look like after years of struggle. "I can't believe this is happening," Michael said one evening, staring at the envelope Trump had given him. The one that had started it all. All these years, and now this. His voice wavered with disbelief, a mixture of gratitude and fear. David, more reserved than his brother, was sitting beside him, deep in thought. "We've always been fighters, Mike. Maybe it's time we fight for something that matters." And as they sat there, unsure of what the future would hold, the phone rang. Michael picked it up, expecting it to be one of the shelters calling about housing availability. But it wasn't. It was Trump's aide, the one who had made the promise of getting them a job. "Michael," the aide asked, "we've got something for you. We've found a position with one of the largest veteran support organizations in the country. You start next week. And it's a full-time role with benefits. They want you to help with outreach, to tell your story and bring others into the fold." Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. It's time to help others like you. You've got a voice now." As Michael hung up the phone, his mind raced. He turned to David, who looked just as stunned. "It's real. This is really happening." David, who had been quiet for so long, finally spoke up. "We can't just take this for ourselves, Mike. We have to make sure others have the same chance." They both understood that this wasn't just about them anymore. They had been given a lifeline. But so many others were still out there, still waiting for that moment of change. And now, they had the platform and the opportunity to make a real difference. Meanwhile, Trump's office had begun drafting a comprehensive national plan. The task force was forming. and lawmakers were beginning to rally around the cause. The proposal included expanded mental health resources for veterans, long-term housing initiatives, job training programs, and, most importantly, a commitment to never let another veteran face the streets without help. But the question remained, would the nation follow through with the promise? Would this movement be sustained? Or would it be swallowed by the endless cycle of politics and bureaucracy? As Michael and David stepped into their new roles with the Veteran Support Organization, they knew they couldn't let that happen. Their personal struggles, their years of isolation, had given them a unique perspective, and now, it was their responsibility to ensure that the promise made on that cold night in New York City didn't fade away. One evening, as they prepared for a meeting with local veteran groups, Michael received a call. This time, it wasn't from the task force or one of the new programs. It was from his old friend, a fellow veteran who had been living on the streets for years.
Mike, I heard about what's going on. Is it true? Are you really helping veterans now? I'm ready to get help.
Michael's heart sank. He knew this moment would come, when the real, long-term work would begin. But hearing it from a friend, someone who had been where he once was, made it all the more real.
"I'll be there tomorrow," Michael said, his voice firm. "We'll get you help. You don't have to do this alone anymore." As he hung up, he turned to David. "This isn't just about us. This is bigger than we thought." David nodded, his expression set. "And it's not over. We've got a long road ahead." The work was just beginning. And while there were countless challenges, setbacks, and doubts ahead, the momentum was undeniable. The change that Trump had sparked on that cold street corner had ignited a fire that was quickly spreading. What Michael, David, and so many others had realized was that they weren't just part of a movement anymore. They were leading it. But the true test of their mission, of the nation's commitment to its veterans, was yet to come. As weeks turned into months, the movement that had begun with a chance encounter on a cold street corner continued to grow. Michael and David, now deeply involved in outreach efforts, had seen firsthand how much work still lay ahead. The task force that Trump had promised began to take shape. And more organizations, local governments, and donors rallied to the cause. But despite the momentum, the road was far from easy. Every victory, every life saved, every family reunited, came with its own set of obstacles. There were setbacks. The funding didn't always come through as quickly as they had hoped. Bureaucracy slowed down some of the most promising programs. Yet, through it all, Michael and David remained steadfast in their commitment. They had seen the face of hardship. They knew how important this was, not just for them, but for countless others who had yet to be reached. One evening, as Michael stood before a room of policymakers and veterans at a town hall meeting, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. He was no longer just a man with a story, he was a leader. A voice for the countless veterans who had spent too long in the shadows. Years ago, Michael began, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "I was on the streets. I felt invisible, forgotten. And my brother, David, was too. But now, because of the work we've done together, because of the promise that was made to us, we have a chance to change the future for so many others. We don't just want to provide help, we want to ensure that no veteran is ever left behind again." David, sitting in the front row, nodded in agreement. For the first time in a long time, both brothers felt like they had a purpose, something that mattered more than their past struggles. As the meeting wrapped up and people came forward to thank Michael and David, Trump called Michael personally. "You've done a hell of a job, Mike," he said on the phone, his voice filled with pride. "But there's still more to be done. This is just the beginning. I'm with you for the long haul." The conversation reaffirmed what Michael had known all along. This wasn't just about one meeting, one promise, it was about a lasting change. Something that would ripple out far beyond their initial efforts. The initiative continued to expand. Shelters were built. Job training programs flourished. And new partnerships between veterans groups and private corporations began to bear fruit. Veterans who had been living on the streets for years found employment and housing. And for the first time in a long while, they felt like they mattered. Like their service had not been in vain. But even as the success stories poured in, Michael and David knew there was no easy solution to the problem. They kept pushing forward. Working late into the night. Meeting with lawmakers. And attending rallies to ensure that the movement never lost its steam. And then, one morning, Michael received a call. This time, it wasn't from a fellow veteran. It was from an old friend, a friend who had been part of his life before everything went wrong. "Mike," the voice said. "I've been clean for 6 months now. I heard about what you're doing, and I need your help. I want to get involved." That simple call reminded Michael why they had started this journey in the first place. They hadn't just set out to change the system, they had set out to heal the lives of veterans and help them rediscover their worth. As the months turned to years, the national initiative continued to evolve. The movement, sparked by a single moment of kindness, had grown into something much larger. Michael and David, no longer just recipients of help, were now catalysts for change. The brothers had come full circle, from forgotten veterans to leaders of a nationwide effort to transform the lives of those who had served. In the end, it wasn't just about the promises that had been made or the money raised. It was about the people, the veterans who had fought for their country and were now fighting to rebuild their lives. It was about the families who had waited years for their loved ones to return. And the communities that had rallied behind them. The story of Michael and David became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of second chances. And while there would always be challenges ahead, the brothers knew that together, with the support of an entire nation, they could face anything. The journey had been long and difficult. But they had finally found what they had been searching for all along, a sense of belonging, a purpose, and the knowledge that they had made a difference. The work wasn't done yet, but they had taken the first step. And that was enough.